Welcome back. I'll invite you all to have a seat. I hope that lunch was nourishing for body and soul. And I want to welcome you back for our second lecture with Dr. Andrew Root. My name is Britta Myers-Carlson, and I serve as visiting assistant professor of practical theology here at the School of Theology. And it is as a fellow practical theologian that I am pleased to welcome Dr. Andrew Root for this lecture. As a fledgling PhD student, I recall the experience of being shaped in my discipline, which is a discipline that takes very seriously the contributions of Christian practice to our understanding of God's identity and character. I was surrounded by a lot of very optimistic Methodists at Boston University School of Theology who taught me to appreciate how virtue ethics and experiences of liberation can teach us what a gift the church is to the world. But I always had this little check in the back of my mind. Perhaps we were being a bit too confident in the accomplishments of human communities. Yes, we're created good, but aren't we also prone to sin? And I sought a voice in my field that would help me to speak more clearly about God's role in this work. It should not have come as a surprise that that voice would come from the faculty at my alma mater, Luther Seminary, where I had learned to be a theologian of the cross. Andrew Root's work affirms Martin Luther's insistence that the cross of Christ is the end of theology and the beginning of faith. It is from our encounter with Jesus on the cross that the work of ministry begins, because it is in that space, often in our moments of frailty and our witness to the suffering of others, that we die to ourselves and rise again with Christ, united in baptism with our fellow Christians and compelled to live in solidarity with all people and with the whole creation. So I'm grateful to Dr. Root for bringing these insights into the field, insights that he has thread throughout his expansive corpus of work that help us to think both critically and hopefully about the work of the church in 2025. Please join me in welcoming him again for his second lecture on ministry in the secular age.
So I left you really hanging here with these seculars, and I think it's double the amount of people here. It's got around that it happens. So that's who you are looking around. Notice my own ego there. You're all hanging on where are we going here. So I left you with these three different groups to play, these two seculars to play. You just have forgotten because you had too much cookies at lunch. Secular one is the sense of a public-private life. We say that this kind of births for the secular. And secular two is the kind of common way we tend to talk about the secular, as if fewer and fewer people are going to church. Now, what I want to say as we go forward, you're going to be shocked by this, but we're going to move to secular. That's good. All right. So I just told you the secret of life, and just these people in the front row got it. See it? These people, yeah. All right. So where I left you hanging and wondering where we were going here is just a quick review, is that we said that the secular comes out of a world where really I want you to see belief was everything. It was impossible to kind of extract yourself from belief for the most part, but it arrives with the secular one where the sense that belief becomes a private reality, and we have our imaginations of a public-private divide. Then we enter into secular two, which is how we tend to define the secular in the sense that we imagine that fewer and fewer people are going to church, that our religious institutions are weaker. I told you I think that this is the red herring. This is usually what we think, that we are losing ground to a-religious spaces. Therefore, we have to do pastoral ministry in a way where we wouldn't say it this crassly, but where we can win a little market share back. How can we win a little bit of market share back? And the good pastor, the good church will do this. This is our temptation, and I think it's a temptation because what comes after secular two, like I made a joke and no one laughed, and now I realize it's because I'm going to tell myself psychologically, it was because you couldn't hear me, is that what comes after secular two is secular three. I know you're shocked. You're shocked by this. Secular three comes next. Now, the first thing to say is do not think of these as stage theories. Don't think like your church could go from secular 1 to secular 2. You leave secular 1 behind, you go to secular 2. These actually build on each other. So once you're secular 1, there's always a sense of secular 1 within you. Once you're secular 2, there's always a sense that people could choose out of participation. But then what is secular 3? And I do want to say that I think secular 3 is the challenge that we face. So secular 3 is this. Secular 3 is living in a time and living in a society where all belief, all forms of belief, become contested. Or another way of saying this, a little more poetically, is it's living in a time where all forms of belief become fragilized. They become fragile. That we become very aware that there are people who believe very different things than us, who live across the street from us, and they seem to be doing okay. Or particularly lay people in your congregation, they're very aware, maybe not tacitly, or maybe tacitly, not explicitly, that they're very aware they could believe something else and keep their job. I don't know any dental hygienists who have been fired for not believing in the Nicene Creed. I mean, there's a deep sense that you could continue to live, for the most part, your life and believe something very differently. So there's this sense of fragilization. Now, to give you a handle on how this kind of functions societally and I think ministerially, it has both, this fragilization has both a plus and a minus to it. But I don't want you to think of those pejoratively, like, hey, there's a good thing and there's a bad thing. I want you to think of it like a battery, where you have to have the plus and the minus of the battery lined up with the plus and the minus in the remote, and that's it. That's all I understand about electrical engineering right there, is just have that plus and minus lined up. But I do know the remote doesn't work unless those things are lined up. So to get the charge, it has to have both the positive charge and the negative charge. So inside secular 3, the negative charge of it is that transcendence as an overall meaning system becomes more and more unbelievable to people. Not even as a statement of confession, or not even as a statement of denial. People can just kind of go through their lives and forget that they believe anything. Or maybe a better way to say that is they can go through their lives and forget about God. I mean, we've all maybe heard this, or you can imagine hearing this, being at a coffee shop and overhearing the person next to you. A lot of my stories are about overhearing other people talking. I don't know, it's telling you a little bit about myself. But you could overhear someone, and they could say, you could hear them saying to the person they're having coffee with, you know, I used to go to this church for a while, but then things got weird, and now I'm going to this church, and, you know, I don't know, it just hasn't been a fit. And you know what, I guess? I just feel like what I just need to take a break from God for a while. I'm just going to take a break from God for a little while. And the person across the table is like, yeah, I get that. You're sitting there listening into this, and you're an ordained minister, and you're like, yeah, I get that. Now, if our ancestors could listen through a wormhole in history, they would think that's the most absurd thing they could ever imagine. Like, to say you're going to take a break from God for a while, for our ancestors would be like saying you're going to take a break from breathing for a while. I mean, it's just not possible. Throughout most of human history, most places outside the West, to take a break from God for a while is just not possible. And yet for us, we can kind of conceive of how that's a reality, how you could take a break from God for a while. So the negative reality is just transcendence as an overall meaning system, that there is a living, speaking God who is moving throughout history, becomes more and more unbelievable to people. Just hard for them. They have to do a lot of work to remember that that exists. Where a secular 0 person, that was blatantly obvious. There was no way around that. That seems so clear. And now it seems much clearer, or we presume it's more clear that maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't a God. It's hard for us to hold on to that. So that becomes the negative reality. The positive reality, however, and again, remember this isn't pejorative, but the positive reality that kind of fuels this, that energizes it, is that people feel an absolute burden. They feel an absolute necessity that they have to create meaning, that they have to find meaning for themselves, that it's their responsibility to create some kind of meaning, some kind of purpose. So this does something incredibly strange in this kind of secular age. In this kind of secular age, it creates a cultural context
where it is secular, but inside that secular reality, it is filled with a surplus of all sorts of spiritualities. That there are spiritualities everywhere. And this doesn't mean that we're not secular. It means that inside this kind of secular, where belief becomes an option, but purpose becomes a necessity, people are really quickly wanting to run to find a spirituality to help them find purpose and meaning, to help direct their lives, to deal with all the competition and all the anxiety of having to find their own meaning and purpose. So this becomes a strange kind of secular age that has all sorts of spiritualities everywhere. And we all know this, in that same coffee shop that you're listening in on people's conversations, you could see someone else across the room, go up to them and say, hey, I've been noticing you, and I just noticed that you are an incredibly spiritual person. I just pick up that vibe. And they would probably be like, well, thank you. Yes, I am a very spiritual person. Almost everyone in our cultural context takes it as a compliment to call them spiritual. You go up to that same person and you say, I've been noticing you from across the room, and you are a very religious person. They'd probably be like, well, wait a minute, what does that mean? What are you saying here? Those might even be words of, argumentation to brew up when you say that. But everybody wants to be spiritual. So this is a kind of secular age when it's the contesting of belief that creates all sorts of different spiritualities. It actually creates a buffet table of spiritualities. And one of the challenges is, well, being an Episcopalian and Anglican becomes one option amongst others. So pastors have this experience quite often. They meet someone in the community and they find out you're a pastor. They're like, oh, that's cool. That's really cool. And they say, well, but yeah, I don't go to church, but I don't need a church. My church is the woods. Every Sunday I take my dog on a walk in the woods, and that just does it for me. And the assumption is those are all equal. Those are all equal, whether it's yoga or taking the Eucharist or a meditation app or a UFO group on YouTube. Those are all, for the most part, equal and the same, and their validity or authority rests on them working for you. As long as they work for you, you partake of the buffet of spirituality. When it doesn't, you go back to the buffet table and find another option. So in this kind of secular age, it creates a surplus of all sorts of third-way options that we have to negotiate. Now, many of you probably already know this. I've been building much of this off the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor. So I've been giving you a kind of a building off that, connecting that to the practice of ministry. And Charles Taylor has written this 770-page book that will make you a bit nauseous because he only wants to answer one question in this book. Just one question, and he doesn't want to answer it for the globe. He just wants to answer it for one part of the world. He just wants to look at how those in he calls them the leftovers of Latin Christendom, those in Western Europe, in North America, and South America, those who have some history back to the Western Church, how in these societies, if you just use big, fat, round numbers, in the year 1500, if you lived in one of those societies, it was impossible to live in them and not believe in God. It was nearly impossible. And yet in a short 500 years, by the year 2000, it completely flipped. And it was easier in a lot of these societies to not believe in God than to believe in God. Now, we may challenge that as Americans or want to nuance it as Americans, but it's definitely true in France. It's definitely true in the Scandinavian countries that this has occurred. Now, Taylor, 770 pages just to answer that one question. Now, worse than that, you really have to read it like 3 or 4 times before it starts making sense. So that really makes you nauseous. But some of us keep reading it 3 and 4 and 5 and 8 and 10 times because he says these remarkable things. And part of it is he will not give us one straight, easy line of how this happened. It takes many different turns and twists. But one of the things he says about living in this kind of secular age, where belief becomes contested or fragilized, he says that this fragilization of belief is a two-way fragilization. It's a two-way fragilization. So it works like this. If you're someone who believes, which he would count himself as a committed Catholic, a Quebecois Catholic, he says if you're someone who believes, you can't help it. You're going to have moments. You're going to have moments living in this kind of age where you think to yourself, is this true? Or is this just the family I grew up in? If I would have grown up in another family somewhere else in the world, would I believe this? You say, no, I believe it. You go on, And then you find yourself fragilized again, and you think, ugh, religion, is it true? Or is this just an evolutionary trick? I mean, all religion is really false pattern recognition all the way down. No, I believe it, I believe it, I believe it. You can't help it. You're going to have moments where you find your belief fragilized. The pastors in the room, your people that you lead through the Eucharist, that you preach to, they are moving in and out of fragilization at all times. But he says it works the other way as well. So let's say you're a young adult. We'll say you're a very, kind of hipster young adult. You live in Brooklyn or something. You've been to an elite university on the East Coast. You don't believe any of this stuff about religion. I mean, come on, you're a well-read, well-educated person. I mean, you know what religion is. I mean, religion is just a historical reality used by powerful people to keep other people down. That's what you believe. And when you die, you go to heaven. Oh, come on. Grow up. Your life is like a TV set. It's on. And when you die, it's like being unplugged. It just goes blank. It's just over. There's nothing there. Come on, grow up. What you believe is that you don't believe. What Taylor says is that even you, in this kind of secular age, will find your unbelief fragilized, and you'll have moments of believing. For instance, your sister says, you gotta come hear your nephew's Christmas concert. You don't want to go. You don't want to listen to this kid's Christmas concert. But you also know Christmas Eve is coming. You don't need conflict. So you show up. You have a couple drinks at half the hour before going. You get to the music hall. You sit in the back, but you get there before the lights go down so you can wave at your sister so you get the points for being there. But you sit in the back and you are just doing the obligation to not have any conflict. But then the lights do go down, and all of a sudden it starts. Ba-ba-ba-bum. It's a Christmas Bach concert, and that music hits, and it washes over you, and you feel grabbed for. You feel like there's something bigger. You feel beckoned to, and for a moment, you find your unbelief fragilized, and you have a moment of believing. Or one we know from empirical studies, people will say things like, you think there's purpose in the world? You think your life has purpose? Do you understand how big the universe is? Do you have any sense of how incredibly vast the universe is? You don't, because we literally can't get our minds across how big it is, and it keeps expanding. It's humongous. And you think that, think about this. Like, our solar system is just this teeny thing amongst millions of other solar systems, and our galaxy is just a off-the-corner, meaningless galaxy, and our Earth is just one little piece of dust amongst all the space that's out there. In your lifetime, it doesn't even register. You can't even look at it. You can't even count it on that piece of carbon that's floating as dust in the universe. And you actually think your life has purpose. What you believe is there's no purpose in the world. That's what you believe. Then you have your first child, and you pick her up, and something reaches for you, and it's more than her little hand that grabs your finger. You feel like you've known her forever. Like somehow you've known her. Somehow this moment is why you exist. That the very purpose you have in the world is to care for her and love her. And you have a moment where your unbelief is fragilized, and you have a moment of believing. Or just one more. You get word, you know your mother's been sick. She's been battling a disease. And you think you have months. You for sure think you have weeks. But you had a phone call home, and your cousin who has been there, living in the same community as your mother, informs you that your mother's died. A bit suddenly. So you make arrangements, you get home for the funeral, you get home for the burial. Your cousin is kind enough to let you stay at his place. You're there for the funeral, for the burial. You spend that night after with your siblings, with your cousins, remembering your mother. It's a night of crying. It's also a night of laughing as you tell stories about your mom, and you spend late up into the night. And your brother says, remember Mom when we were in middle school, how when she used to sweep the floor and clean up the kitchen, she used to put on that 80s song, or that 80s song, Come On Eileen, would come on. Come on, Eileen, yeah, I swear what I mean. And Mom used to do this hip dance, with her hips, and she'd sing into the top of the broom. Remember that? Remember how embarrassed we were in middle school when she did that? And that just makes you miss your mom, long to be with her, and you cry, and then you laugh, and then you cry and laugh, and then you go to bed. And you've been up pretty late. Your alarm goes off. And you realize, oh my gosh, you did nothing to prepare to get to the airport, and you have an early morning flight. So you turn and you grab all your stuff, throw it in your suitcase. You rush out. You're really running late now. You rush out to the rental car. It's parked in your cousin's driveway. You start it, and you've left the radio on. And as soon as you start it, there it is. Come on, Eileen, I swear what I mean. And you have a choice. You have a choice. You can think to yourself, oh my gosh, Jeffrey Bezos is listening to everything we say all of the time. That is a legitimate way to inhabit this kind of secular age. Or it's just as illegitimate to inhabit this kind of secular age to ask, is there something bigger? Is it possible there's something more out there? Is it possible that there's even something at the center of the universe that is reaching for me and cares for me in my grief in this moment? This is what it means to live in a secular age. That actually both of those are quite, dare we say, logical or possible ways to live inside of this secular age. But what happens is we become mutually fragilized in one way or the other. And ministry is always done with people in the midst of fragilization. But regardless if you're someone who believes and have moments of fragilization, or you're someone who doesn't believe and have moments of believing, regardless, we all share something. We all share something, and this becomes the very context in which you do ministry. We all share what Charles Taylor calls an immanent frame. That as human beings, we are interpretive creatures, so we always see the world through some kind of lens. It's given to us by our institutions, the way we're educated, the way we grow up. We see the world through some kind of lens. And the lens in which we see the world, the framework in which we see the world, tends to be more immanent than transcendent. So this is Charles Taylor, and this is Charles Taylor saying, doesn't Charles Taylor look like a nice 90-year-old man you'd like to give a hug to? But he says this, he says, the immanent frame is a constructed social space that frames our lives entirely within a natural rather than a supernatural order. It is a circumscribed space of the modern social imaginary that precludes transcendence. All right, I have a major recommendation for you. If you're someone in here who really suffers from insomnia, what I would recommend you do is take a picture of this and just read it over and over again before bed, and you will quickly slide into a deep sleep. It has been scientifically proven. I don't remember this study, but that philosophers' quotes actually have tryptophan in them. So this is making you very, 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 very tired. But you see the contrast he's making, that there was a time across the West where the frame, the interpretive frame, would be more of a supernatural one than a natural one. It would be more of a transcendent one than an immanent one. The presumption is something uncanny or weird happens. The presumption was it must be the gods, or it must be God, or there must be something going on in the cosmos. We tend to assume, well, there's some natural explanation for this. I mean, something weird happens, like that exit sign falls off the wall, and we wonder, well, how long's it been up? How long do metal and bolts last before they give way? We presume first and foremost a natural material answer. So this is philosopher quotes. I have to tell you, they do make me tired a bit. I think what you need to really make this make sense is a pop star's lyrics. All right, now you're thinking, wow. At least in my mind, you're thinking this. Wow, this guy is cool. Hold on to that thought. Keep that thought. But I do have to tell you, I'm now going to show you lyrics from a pop song that's like 13 or 14 years old. But don't pay attention to that. Just keep thinking I'm cool. I need it, all right? So this comes from a British pop star. Some of you in here look like you were big fans of the British pop star Lily Allen. Do you remember the British pop star Lily Allen? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Here's maybe the most controversial thing I'll say all day. Lily Allen is who Katy Perry was trying to be. It's very controversial. Now, so Katy Perry fans are very mad at me, but I do have to say, I did not insult Taylor Swift. So you are, by law, not allowed to hurt me. If I said something bad about Taylor, then you could hurt me, but I did not. So let's just be clear about this. All right, so here's a lyric from Lily Allen. If you don't know Lily Allen, the point is it's very poppy music, but also very irreverent. It's a pop lyric with a middle finger waved in your face. I mean, way beyond Katy Perry. I mean, it's very irreverent, very poppy, and she has a song called The Fear. Again, 14 years old, but don't pay attention to that. And this gives you a sense of it. She says this. She says, life's about film stars and less about mothers, but it doesn't matter because I'm packing plastic, and that's what makes my life so effing fantastic. Now, I have to tell you, folks, I have no idea what any of that means. Like, no clue what any of that means. And it is very dangerous to exegete pop stars' lyrics. So I'm not sure what she's saying. I'm not sure what packing plastic means. Probably that she has a credit card with a major credit limit on it. More than likely, she's had one part of her body medically enhanced. And this becomes the measure of the good life. So you get it. Very irreverent. Imagine a pop beat behind this. But this is what I want to show you. The second one, she says, now I'm a weapon of massive consumption. It's not my fault, so I'm programmed to function. Now here it is. Now I'm not a saint, but I'm not a sinner. Now everything's cool as long as I'm getting thinner. Now I'm not a saint, but I'm not a sinner. Now everything's cool as long as I'm getting thinner. This is the imminent frame. I mean, just think about it. For most of the history of the West, people really cared. I mean, really, really, really cared. Were they saints or sinners? Were they bound for heaven or they were bound for hell? What did God think? What would be God's judgment of their life? They really cared. Some of them couldn't sleep at night wondering about this. I mean, Martin Luther, when he was in the Erfurt Monastery, literally could not sleep, wondering what God thought of him, wonder if he was a saint or if he was a sinner. I mean, it is a historical reality that Martin Luther once confessed his sins. I mean, get this in your mind. Confessed his sins to his confessor for 6 straight hours. That's 2 Lord of the Ring movies. Like, that's a long time. 6 hours. He confesses his sin to his confessor. The story goes, he leaves the confessional, he walks away and thinks, I feel so unburdened. I feel good. And then thinks to himself, maybe it's bad to feel good. And went back and tried to restart the confession again. And his confessor was like, Marty, I'm exhausted. I can't do this. You have to go do some stuff, and then we can talk again. This isn't going to work. But Luther could not sleep. He has one of his great theological breakthroughs when he realizes, rereading Romans, that it's really not an either or, either saint or sinner. It's both and. It becomes known as Luther's symbol. And at least for Northern Europeans, this was a great balm. That it is a both and reality. This is a great balm to them, all the way up until 2012 in this British pop star. All right, we're not going to give her that much credit. But essentially she says, not once have I woken up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat wondering, what does God think of me? Am I a saint or am I a sinner? Am I bound for heaven or bound for hell? She's saying she has not lost 1 minute of sleep worried about that question. Interestingly, though, she has woken up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat filled with anxiety. Oh, she has. She is not. The realities of Voltaire, remember the French philosopher Voltaire, he used to say, as in the dawn of the Enlightenment, he would say, if we could just get these Catholic priests off of our back, we would never feel guilty again. Guilt is just a creation of these Catholic priests. I don't know if you spent any time with American, upwardly mobile, middle-class people. They are incredibly guilty. Guilt is everywhere. But the guilt, the direction of the guilt, where the guilt comes from, is not from some transcendent reality. Not from some God who brings God's law and brings judgment and then brings grace. The source of the guilt is not God. The source of the guilt is them. They let themselves down. They think, I could have done so much more. I could have made so much more out of my life. I mean, look at all the people I graduated with. Look at all the people back for alumni weekend at the seminary. They've done so much more than I have. I could have started eating right long ago. I could have started exercising but didn't. I could have started that business, but I wasn't brave enough to start it. I could have started writing, but I didn't start writing. I could have started that podcast, but I just didn't start that podcast. And I could have started that other podcast, but I just didn't start that podcast. And I could have started that third idea for a podcast that I had, but I didn't start it. All right, you get my joke. Everyone has 3 ideas for a podcast. And I'm here from the Bureau of Podcasts to tell you we're done. We have enough podcasts. They're over. You'll have to wait till some others close before you can do that. But you see, the source of the guilt is that you've let yourself down. So you see that it becomes an imminent reality as opposed to a transcendent reality. So Lily Allen has lost a lot of sleep. She has woke up in the middle of the night overtaken by existential fear, by a deep sense of terror. It's just that its source, again, is not God's word. The source is, well, swimsuit season's coming. What are people going to think of me? It becomes an imminent reality that even gives terror. That we do ministry inside an imminent frame. I mean, that is quite a challenge, I think, especially for folks, Episcopal folks like you, Episcopalians, in doing the Eucharist. What does this mean inside of an imminent frame? How does the imminent frame become open within it? It may be the very thing we absolutely need to open the imminent frame. But people come in and are conditioned to see the world through this imminent reality. But it does create deep questions regardless. I mean, it creates very deep questions. Taylor says, we can't help looking over our shoulders from time to time, looking sideways, living our faith in a condition of doubt and uncertainty. And even Lily Allen, while we get these very irreverent verses, I'm a weapon of massive consumption, it's not my fault, it's not a program to function, I'm not a saint, I'm not a sinner, everything's cool as long as I'm getting thinner, we do get this very probing chorus, this very longing kind of chorus where she says, I don't know what's right or what's real anymore, I don't know how I'm meant to feel anymore, when do you think it all becomes clear, because I'm being overtaken by the fear. All right, now what we should do is I should play this Lily Allen song for you, right? All right, I'm not going to do that. That's too obvious. But I am going to play a song for you, and I hope our audio guy is here because we may need a little volume on this clip. It's a little quiet. But I want to play another song for you. And this song, you know, I tried to be cool and was showing you lyrics from a song 12, 13, 14 years old. But this is a life hack. I mean, if you only get one thing from being here today, this is a life hack that you can take, which is that if you're ever in any conversation and you say, this comes from, or I've been listening to an independent band, everyone has to think you're cool. It's a metaphysical law. They have to. So I want to play a song from you from an independent band. See how I'm redeeming myself for that lyric. So this comes from an independent band that you can tell me if you've heard of them. The band is called Purple Mountains. Has anyone heard of Purple Mountains? Oh, good. I'm the coolest person in the room. See, that just happens. All right, so this comes from an independent band called Purple Mountains. The song is called Margaritas at the Mall. What I want to do is give you a little bit of an assignment here. It's about a 3-minute song. You'll see the lyrics come up, and what I want you to do is just make note of what lyric you find very interesting, what lyric kind of jumps out to you. And I'm going to then have you turn to someone next to you and share that. So I'm letting the introverts know after this there will be a talking to your neighbor section. So wait till the song's over, and then you can pretend to get a phone call. And it will just be like 3 minutes tops, and then you can come back. So what lyric jumps out to you? We'll hope for good volume.
We're just drinking margaritas at the mall. 'Cause happy hours got us by the ball. Magenta, orange, acid green, peacock, blue and burgundy. Drinking margaritas at the mall. We're drinking margaritas at the mall. Drinking margaritas at the mall.
All right, I'm just going to give you 1 minute. Turn to someone next to you. What lyric jumped out to you? Okay, so I know extroverts are just getting going and introverts couldn't wait for this to be done. But just quickly, just yell out, maybe one or two people yell out a lyric that jumped out to them. Subtle God. How long can the world go on under such a subtle God? I think it starts, how long can the world go on under no new word from God? How long can the world go on under such a subtle God? I mean, in many ways, this really summarizes the project Charles Taylor's trying to tell us. This is really what it means to live in a secular age, is the West hasn't eliminated God. You ask most people, they still would check that they believe in God. But the West, the great accomplishment, if you want to call it, of the West, has been to make God quite a subtle reality. God is a very subtle force that you can think about or not think about. But how long, this young man wonders, can the world go on under such a subtle God? How long can the world go on under no new word from God? But what do you get in replace of it? I mean, you get something in place of the terrifying word of a living God. Well, you get the mall. You get margaritas. I'm amazed. I'm actually amazed. Remember I said at the very beginning, I'm worried that if we're not clear what we mean by the secular, we may actually make matters worse. And when we think of this as a secular two issue, as primarily a secular two issue, we are losing market share. We do not have the kind of interest. We are not able to win people's interest. I mean, we have a history of this since the 1990s. American Protestantism has worked really hard to turn their churches into malls, attract people. And yet the real danger of that is it just drowns people. They choke in the immanence. It just locks them into the immanent frame. And so one of the ways you cope with such a subtle God where there is no more word from God is you just get margaritas. And I can't tell you how many people, how many Protestant leaders have said to me about their congregations or denominations, if we could just get a margarita machine at our church. Okay, no one has ever said that because I would go to that church if they said that. But I can't tell you how many people have said, coffee. If we just had better coffee. If we just found some way to advertise the right way. And what we end up doing is just giving people nothing but further immanence. I think to be a pastor in this day and age, you should lose some sleep. I really do. I'm not one to say we should just pat each other on the back and be like, everything's fine. You should lose some sleep. But what I worry about is the sleep you lose is waking up in the middle of the night and thinking, why is my church so small? Why does that big denominational church across town have all the people? Well, my fellow students I went to seminary with, man, they've published books or they have podcasts. Why am I not important? No one gives me the likes of my hot take when on Facebook or whatever social media. Usually, I unfortunately think that we lose a lot of sleep in that vein. I do think you should lose sleep, though. But I don't think it should be there. I think you should lose sleep with, how am I going to help these people hear the word of a living God again? These people in imminence, how am I going to help them through the liturgy, through the preached word? How am I going to help them encounter the word of a living God again? That is the challenge. Not lost market share, but how do you help people imagine again that God lives and speaks and acts? So let me land this plane with this lecture by just telling you one story that maybe illustrates maybe what this might look like a bit in pastoral ministry. So a few years ago, I'm sure some of you have read this book. I came across this book by an anthropologist, a psychological anthropologist who teaches at Stanford named Tanya Luhrmann. She writes in the name T.M. Luhrmann. She wrote this award-winning book called When God Talks Back. And what she wanted to explore, she said there's so many divides in our culture, but one we haven't looked at enough is there's a group of people, they're a small group of people, but they're there nevertheless. This small group of people hears God talk to them all the time. They talk as if God talks to them all the time. And she says we have another group of people, a larger group of people, who think that anyone who talks like that, who says God speaks to them, well, those people must be out of their mind. Like this must be low-grade schizophrenia or something. And those two groups of people, like they share cubicle walls. So she decided she wanted to study those people who say God speaks to them. So like a good anthropologist, she moved in with those people. So she went, and she was in at the University of Chicago at the time, so she joined a vineyard church in the Pentecostal tradition. She joined a vineyard church and spent 3 years with them. Moved to Northern California to take her job at Stanford, joined another vineyard church, was with them for 6 years. She writes this book. It's really, I think, a beautiful book. She says, can we say, after spending 6 years with these people, studying these people, can we say that people who hear God speak to them, can we say that this is a psychological issue? That this is kind of low-grade schizophrenia or something? She says, absolutely not. There's no correlation to people who hear God speak in any kind of mental illness. She said, well, then can we say that they are hearing God speak? She said, well, I mean, I'm submitting this book for tenure at Stanford. You don't get tenure for saying God speaks to people. But then she did something more beautiful. She said, what I can tell you is that in the 6 years of living with these people, my father died. It broke me in two, and these people prayed for me. These people got me through. I was mesmerized by it. I thought it was the most beautiful thing. But then I thought to myself, what would happen if you asked people outside the Pentecostal tradition if they've heard God speak? Like, you ask people in a Pentecostal tradition, have they heard God speak? They say yes, they get patted on the back. You say that, ask a Lutheran or a Presbyterian if they've heard God speak, and they say yes, people step back. Like, this just doesn't happen in those traditions. So I decided to go to the Pacific Northwest and do interviews with people in a group of people in 2 Presbyterian churches and a Lutheran church. Did this thing called life history interviewing. I tell you that because the sample was only 12 people, so it's not a conclusive study nationally or anything. But I needed 12 people. You write 6 big questions. You have an hour-long conversation. With their permission, you record it, you transcribe it, you look for themes. It ended up being an incredibly beautiful experience. I asked these people, have you ever had an experience where God spoke to you? I had a man in his mid-70s who said, whenever anyone says God speaks to them, I don't trust those people. I think that's used as pure manipulation. I would never trust anyone who ever said God speaks to them. Except one time. Every one of those 12 people had a one-time experience. And usually it was a call into ministry. And I don't mean it was, hey, go get an MDiv. It was like this guy who said he has one-time experience. His best friend who lived across the street, his wife had died, been married for 50 years, lived across the street for 35 years. He was raking his yard. Gus, his friend across the street, was in such deep depression he couldn't get out of bed. He heard God say to him, go tell Gus this word. And he went and consoled him, gave a word of consolation in the midst of this. These were beautiful stories. I mean, I felt absolutely honored to hear them. After hearing these stories, I asked each person, I said, man, this is an amazing story. Have you ever told anyone in your church this story? All 12 people. Nope. Never told anyone in my church this story. I said, okay, well, clearly you've told your pastor because your pastor nominated you to talk to me. So clearly you've told your pastor a story. Nope. Never told my pastor this story. How long can the world go on under such a subtle God? And this God isn't subtle. This God is moving into death to bring life out of it. And yet, even within our congregations, we create no space for these stories to be shared. No space for them to articulate these experiences, to try to make sense of them. But what I want to end with is the last interview I did, which happened to be the youngest woman in my study. She's probably in her mid-30s. And she came into her pastor's office on the Sunday morning, and she looked like she wanted to be anywhere but talking to me. I mean, every question I asked her, she would answer it in 2 sentences, and she was basically doing this. She wasn't, but she was basically doing it. She was told it'd be an hour. She thought, we can get this done in 25 minutes. Let's go. It was not going well. And I had run out of questions. I mean, I still had a half hour left, and I had run out of questions. So I just decided to just make one more effort at trying to get her to talk, but I was out. So I turned to her, and her name was Rachel, and I said, Rachel, before you go, just one last question. Have you ever, I don't know where this question came from, I said, have you ever had an experience where you felt so deeply ministered to, you were sure it was the presence of Jesus Christ? Have you ever had that kind of experience? Her whole disposition changed, and she says, I have. She said, I've been telling you throughout this interview that I'm a single mom, but I've never told you why I'm a single mom. And she'd been saying all the time, I'm really busy because I'm a single mom. I'm a single mom. I love this church because I was a single mom. Everything was about a single mom. She said, I'm a single mom, but I've never told you why. She said, I'm a single mom because 6 years and 2 months ago, my husband got on a plane. He flew from Seattle to Chicago. He was supposed to be gone 3 days on a business trip. He was gone 13 hours. I got a phone call. On the other line was a very uncomfortable young man. And he said, hi, ma'am, I'm calling from the hotel that your husband stayed at last night. So, ma'am, I'm calling because, ma'am, let me start over. So, hi, ma'am, I'm calling from the hotel your husband stayed at. So, ma'am, there's a situation. She said he couldn't get his words out. He just kept stopping and starting. He couldn't get these out. She had no idea what was going on. She said he gathered himself and he said, ma'am, so I'm calling. He said, just stop and start again. And finally he said, so ma'am, just let me start this over. I've never done anything like this. He says, so ma'am, I'm calling. Ma'am, your husband is dead. He said to her, our housekeeping went into his room this morning, found him, what we thought was unconscious in his bed. We called 911 right away. They got there. They pronounced him dead on the scene. They say he may have had a heart attack in the middle of the night or something. He said, my manager is now dealing with it. I've been asked to call you and give you the hospital morgue where we're sending your husband's body to. She says when he said this, it didn't make any sense. Like she couldn't make it make sense. Like it just felt like it was something that couldn't even click into place. But once it did click into place, she said her first experience was the color being sucked out of the room. She felt like she was living in black and white. And then she looked into the living room and she saw her toddler and her preschooler. And her first thought that came into her mind was, my life is over. She took out a little business card. She wrote the address to the hospital morgue on it. She hung up the phone. She called her mother to come stay with her kids. She booked the flight to Chicago. She said she flew to Chicago. That flight lasted 10 minutes. It lasted 10 days. She said, I was so drowning in grief, I didn't even feel like my body was in time. She got to O'Hare. She went down to the cab stand. She handed the cabbie the card. He drove. She said, I should have noticed this. I should have noticed that he parked the car. But she said, I was drowning in grief. I didn't notice anything. She walked in. The people at the hospital morgue had her itinerary. As soon as she came in, they took her to a side room, and she said she stood there. She said she stood there a minute, felt like a day, because this was it. This nightmare was going to be realer than real now. She said she stood there, 2 doors open in the back. They wheeled in a gurney. There it was, a body under a sheet. The man from the hospital morgue grabbed the sheet to pull it back so she could identify her husband's body. And just as he was pulling it back, she said she felt a hand on her shoulder and an arm came around the front of her with a water bottle. And she started to cry. And she said to me, it was the cabbie. She says, it was the cabbie. And then she said to me, I never felt more ministered to. I got back on that plane and I did not know how I was going to put my life back together. But I knew Jesus Christ had not abandoned me, that God would get me through this. And then she said the words again, I've never told anyone that story. Again, how long can the world go on under such a subtle God? In this kind of secular age, maybe the core thing you do as a pastor is create spaces for those stories to be shared. But more than just shared in some kind of affirmation society, there's something more intense that needs to be done, which those stories need to be interpreted. Those stories need to be interpreted inside the tradition, inside the Christian tradition, next to the scriptures. They need to be interpreted. And sometimes the stories that are told, we need to say, nah, Larry, I don't think that's God. I think that was 3 glasses of wine and NyQuil. That's why you were saying things. But sometimes the pastoral task is to say, God has moved. And I know nothing about that cabbie. Like, I literally know nothing. It was just the beauty of hearing that story, sharing that moment. It felt like a gift to me. I said, thank you. So this is completely fictional. But that cabbie needs a community like yours to stumble into. And he needs to say, I got to tell you guys, at some Tuesday night Bible study or something, he needs to say, I got to tell you what happened to me. I've been working all night, overnight shift. This is going to be my last run of the day. Picked this woman up at the airport. I could catch her eye, the grief. I knew something was up. Then I looked at that address. I knew that place. Because when my cousin Ronnie had his accident at work and died, that's where they took his body. I got there. I don't know what it was. I was supposed to just drop this woman off and go home. Like, this is it. This is my end of my day. I got there and I heard it. I heard it clear as day. It must have been God. It must have been the Holy Spirit. I heard it. I heard God say to me, don't leave her alone. Whatever you do, do not leave her alone. I didn't know what to do. So I just walked in, put my hand on her shoulder and gave her a bottle of water. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it, but it feels big to me. It needs the community, the Sanctorum Communio, to say, behold, you have been a servant of the Lord. God has moved in our midst. This is how we open up the imminent frame. This is how God becomes anything but subtle. This God is a living God who speaks and moves and takes what is dead and brings life out of it. It is good news to the world. Let me pray for us. God bless us. And God, we pray for vision. We pray for the bravery to speak of your action in the world, knowing that it comes into impossibility, bringing forth new possibility. So bless us, God, and bless our communities. Amen. All right, so we are at about 5 or so minutes. It's a very strange thing to land with that story and then open up to a bit of Q&A, but we have a bit of time for that. And this is always an odd thing because now we just open up the table and who's going to be the first awkward person to come forward. So let's just take a breath. If you need to, turn to someone next to you and just try to unpack this for 30 seconds. Like, what questions remain open for you? What thoughts do you still have? 30 seconds, take a deep breath, and then these 2 mics are open, and we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions, I think. All right, let's come back together. We have our first question here. I believe that mic is on, so we'll go for it.
It's usually loud anyway.
Okay.
So these shifts from secular 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, how much of that do you think is the result of the transformation of societies from these communitarian societies to these highly individualistic societies? Mm-hmm. And how much of it is the byproduct of that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So how much is it, does this process, is it moved kind of from a collective sense of life to a more individual sense of life, or does that actual conception come on the wave of something bigger?
Yeah,
right?
is it like a cause or a byproduct?
Yeah. I tend to come from a tradition that says that there's never one thing, but it has a lot to do with the cause. That it's more cause than byproduct. I mean, you can see some of the underneath of this is for good or for ill, or one of the pushbacks to Charles Taylor's work has been it's far too connected to Max Weber's work. the German sociologist, who was really building up this guy named Ferdinand Tunius and the move from the Gemeinschaft to the Gesellschaft, so from the collective to the society. And I come more from that tradition.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Please.
Hello. I'm curious about Secular 3. It reminded me very much of Camus' Absurdism. And are you familiar with it? And
I wish I was, and I could pretend
the-
like a good
the-
academic, but I probably am not. So yeah.
like beginning with a sort of existential dread recognition, and then the individuals cobbling together some sort of recognition of that.
Yeah, what I would say is that, like, to be really fair, the kind of existential center of human experience is pretty central for me. And I am probably, one might say, especially at the end of this last lecture, I turned Charles Taylor into a Lutheran. And he's a Catholic. But for me, apropos the very kind introduction, that there is, where I think Taylor is really particularly helpful to me is that I think the core problematic that the pastor has to deal with is how to testify towards divine action, if you will. And what Taylor helps us descriptively see is why that's occurred from a kind of cultural perspective. I don't think Taylor can help us be as constructive necessarily. And so what I've kind of done here at the end is take a certain kind of Lutheran imagination of divine action and have it respond to Taylor's sense. So the existential becomes very important here, is that when the human being comes up against their limit and actually stands in need of something outside of them to come and care for them, then we become very aware that this could be the work of God, that God moves in this way. When the human agent has to continue to make something of themselves and perform something, well, that could lead to forms of idolatry. And so the existential becomes important in that way.
Thank you.
Yep. I think here, I gotta tell you, I'm doing really good at answering these quickly because usually it's 12 minutes every question, because you get conditioned as an academic that if you just talk long enough, they have to pass you. So you just learn how to just do that. So we're doing well here. Yes, please.
I work as a campus minister, and so Secular 3 is every day of every week.
Yeah.
And I've kind of intuitively found my way towards a lot of the formation that I'm doing with my students is trying to form a sacramental imagination and help them see that, yes, God is all around us, right?
Yeah.
But I'm trying to figure out how we get to the point of the stories you shared, because the students that I'm working with are not able to articulate that.
Yeah.
Like, how do we equip people to be able to do what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, one of the real difficult things with it, which is a kind of segue into our third lecture, is it actually takes quite a bit of time. Because I don't think you can control it. So for instance, like, I don't think you could say, it would be malpractice for me to say, and now I have 4 points that will get these stories like Rachel's to happen in your ministry. Because once you put your hands on it and try to direct it, you actually potentially destroy it. So there is a certain thing that goes against the grain of just the way we're formed as late modern people, which is, first of all, we love to instrumentalize everything. So it's like, give me an instrument to get to this. And then make sure that instrument moves fast. And in some sense, I want to say one of the ways we have to form ourselves for this different kind of perspective is be willing to wait on it. But what that waiting actually means is not necessarily doing nothing. It means attending to what it means to really hear each other and care for each other, to know each other. So there's a certain relational dynamic that becomes really important that I think pastorally we just try to set. And then we wait for the moment of confession, for the story, for the experience. And I guess it goes back to the existential perspective that maybe this is my low Lutheran anthropology here, I just don't think we can live in these deep connections without having experiences where we have to confess loss, brokenness, need. But it is a question of, can we wait for it? And with a younger generation who has been told the only public assertions you should ever make are ones of having it all together, that takes a long, long time with these folks. Like, there's a kind of huge continuum of either you emote in a very unhealthy way that kind of becomes controlling, or you just are more likely you're always just shining yourself up and you're always kind of performing. And so to genuinely be someone who can confess their need takes a long time. And I think and that also is the rub in campus ministry when you're like, I have 4 years. But it may take 4 years to hear some of these stories. But this is the beauty of the Christian tradition in some ways. I mean, what happened just here right now is that Rachel's story becomes a moment of proclamation to you, in some sense, that you share in. And so I guess another pastoral dynamic is, how do you articulate these stories that have existed in the community that testify to who God is and how God has moved? You know, there's a sense for Paul that he's always just rehearsing this story of the encounter with Jesus Christ. And he is saying to his church, not all of you have had an encounter like I had, but some of you have. And we come here and we remember this story. And so the remembering becomes important too, I think. So it's a long, long answer. I think we are, unfortunately, out of time. I apologize deeply.
There is a third lecture